Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
Ladies and gentlemen, coming to you live from the mighty known as Michigan, this is Spaced Out Radio. I'm your host this evening, BigWilly, covering for the ever-luscious and incredibly talented Mr. Dave Scott. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot, read up on the SR Newswire, and so much more. We ask that you please like, subscribe, and don't you dare forget to ring that bell. If you could do us a huge favor and share with the friends, we would be incredibly grateful, as this helps SR grow to bring you, our listeners, even more content, and truly supports the show as a whole. Speaking of support, if you'd like to help ensure the lights if you'd like to ensure the lights here at Spaced Out Radio stay on, please know Super Chat is open and a fantastic way to support everything we do here at Spaced Out Radio. We also have a store filled with SOR swag and merchandise for your browsing pleasure, which also supports Spaced Out Radio as a whole. You could pick up a Woo hoodie or t-shirt or tank top to support SOR at all times. We also have thermoses, mugs, to keep your favorite beverages hot or cold. Links to our store right below in the show notes. Don't forget to follow us on all of our other media sites like TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter. Links to all of these and so much more will be listed below in the show notes. Now grab your favorite beverage and snuggle up next to the fire. It's time to get the Woo train rolling by bringing in my guest for this evening, W.T. Watson. And just who is this W.T. Watson, you might ask? Well, let me tell you a little bit about him. Amazon best-selling author W.T. Watson is a coffee addict and a writer of both fiction and nonfiction. He infuses his work with his expertise in cryptozoology, monster lore, magic, Forteania, and the paranormal. W.T. brings a unique, shamanic, and magical perspective to all of his work after over 30 years of exploration in these topics. When he is not writing or reading about monsters, he can be found in the outdoors, allowing his dogs to take him for a walk around his neighborhood in Kitchener, Ontario. He lives with his spouse, Stacy, in a townhome that would be jammed with books if it were not for e-readers. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is W.T. Watson, who I'm going to bring in now. Also, he prefers to go by Travis. So, Travis, thank you very much for joining us here on Spaced Out Radio. It is a pleasure to have you on this evening.
And thanks very much for the invitation. We're both going to have trouble talking tonight.
Oh, I'm telling you. It's sometimes the tongue monster, there's real monsters and there are tongue monsters. Oh, save you the critters. Thank you so much. That sneak up on us. And I tell you what, sometimes they're just there. We just roll with it. That's what happens.
Yeah. I just need more coffee. I'll be fine.
I know, and that's what was funny. We were chatting about that backstage. I'm sure the listeners were like, "Oh my gosh, what's happening?" They keep us accountable. 20 seconds over, or whatever it might be. But I was finishing up the pot there. I brewed myself some coffee. I was ready to go. I have to say, I seen that about you when I was reading your bio. I said, well, this has to be a solid man right here. This is an upright person. He's a fan of coffee. That you can't go wrong with that to start things out.
Yeah, that's a habit that started a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. When I was working midnight shifts when I was in my 20s. So I developed the love back then, and I've never given it up. It's
funny how certain things throughout life seem to shift, right? And then we have things that just seem to stick with us throughout our life. Like for instance, for coffee for me as well, goes way back. My mom used to put it in my bottle. I'm not recommending that. I'm not saying Spaced Out Radio recommends that, but that's what she did. She put it in a bottle for me way back then, you know. So Travis, I just got to say, there's several avenues I'd love to go down with you this particular evening if you're up for it. As we know, obviously you have, and I'd like to let everybody know too as well, I do have the links to all of your books that are currently on Amazon, linked in the show description. So at the end of the show, or if you're listening back to this perhaps in the future, just know that you're able to click on that link, and that will take you directly to any and all of Travis's books, as well as several different social media websites we have listed for you there. So thank you for providing those as well.
Oh, absolutely.
But before we jump into this side of, Travis, excuse me, Travis the author, can we just, I hate when people sometimes say this, where did he begin or everything, but I really would like to go there. I'd love to know where and when did Travis start? Where were you born first and foremost? I like to, let's start there. Where did Travis have his beginning in this world?
Yeah, so I'm originally from San Antonio, Texas. I was born there. I've been all over the United States and emigrated to Canada about 2 years ago. My spouse works for the University of Waterloo as a computer science educator. So I ended up here, and I'm quite happy, in my little town home in Kitchener. More importantly, though, I think a lot of people are curious about how people who get into the paranormal actually got into it, and there's a very clear origin story for me. My dad actually had a very profound UFO encounter when he was in the Air Force back in the 1950s.
Really?
And is a story that I heard a lot growing up in my youth. Apparently, he was coming back from a night on the town, so to speak. So he had consumed some alcohol. We won't, not admit that. But
sometimes you got to have the strong coffee. You just got to do it sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So he and a buddy were coming back in whatever car he happened to be driving at the time. Had an encounter with the classic cigar-shaped UFO with purple lights and the whole schmear out in the desert near San Bernardino, California. He told that story with great vigor. Whenever anybody, questioned the idea that there was life somewhere else, he was a huge believer that there was actually a UFO base out in hill country of Texas. Can't really tell you about that or not. I never saw anything out there. But so he was, that was kind of a seminal influence for me. Coincidentally, at the same time that happened, I happened to get my hands on a Ripley's Believe It or Not comic book that was all about hauntings. And those two things together kind of set me down a path that's, I'm 61 now. I've probably been into the paranormal since I was 8. So I'm one of those people who, I'm that kid who had actually read Ivan Sanderson's Abominable Snowman cover to cover by the time I was in 6th grade. So.
Wow. It's funny you bring that up. I just watched, it was a couple months back, but I have a couple young ones myself, all under the age of 6. And we watched one of the old, I don't know if it was directly called Abominable Snowman, but I want to say it was something really close to that. It was like a mid-50s film there having to do with the mountains, and it had to do with, this, it's several things we're going to discuss tonight, fog, and obviously the idea of a Yeti or, the lore that had been in the area for these people living there who just accepted it as fact. And then you have, of course, these Americans who are over there that this is silly. And it's kind of funny to see how that's been depicted early on, even in Hollywood, where it's given us these strong, whether we realize it or not, I wouldn't want to say preset curses to how we approach the topic as a whole. And maybe that's not always the case. I mean, that's something you've discussed. Not only you've lived, but you also discussed in your certainly your latest book, but in all of them. But in your latest one, you certainly have hit on that and the idea that, maybe the people that we thought were a little crazy, we should be taking a little more serious, lending an ear to these people that have these tales that just seem too unbelievable to be true, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really, you know, bends me the wrong way when it comes to, skeptics and so forth, is this whole idea that, any testimony from a child is almost automatically dismissed. And it's dismissed because people say, oh, well, they have this great imagination. It's like, you know what? I have a great imagination. I write fiction books too. You know, I can create whole worlds. That doesn't mean that
Right.
I can't separate reality from my fiction. You know?
Very
Um,
true.
and anybody who's had children knows that your kids are fully capable of separating their playtime stuff from from everyday ordinary reality that we all agree on, consensual reality.
Hmm.
So, I always get a little irritated with people who do that. It's like the people in authority, like park rangers or conservation officers, or somebody who gets some guy who comes running out of the woods and he's like, "I just saw a dog man," or a giant wolf or whatever, and or a Sasquatch, and they're told, "Oh no, you saw a bear,"
Mhm.
or "Oh no, wolves don't get that big out here." It's like, well, I'm sorry, I just saw it. you
Yeah.
know, you know, at the very least, what you should do is go to where I was and look and see if there are tracks or some physical sign that what I think I saw. Instead of just dismissing people out of hand. That I find
Hmm.
that really irritating. So,
And I often wonder, and maybe I'm sure you've approached this many times in your own head or thought about it, and even our listeners that are listening now, maybe you listening to this back at whatever time you're listening to it or live, is what if you hear these amazing stories sometimes, and sometimes honestly quite frightening stories to really
mhm.
hear. And I've often tried to, when listening, put myself into that and go, what would I really actually do? And I've got to give credit to those that actually come forward and say something because we might enjoy these stories now, hearing these tales of just absolutely obscure, just are you kidding me kind of things that we love to hear about. But when you're the person coming forward and saying these things, what do you do? I mean, it's just, for instance, and I don't want to jump, maybe we can jump straight in your book here a little bit.
Go
You
ahead.
had, yeah, so obviously, well, let's do this. First of all, I have a couple pictures here, and then once again, guys, all the links here in the show chats. If you're playing it back, feel free to click on that. This was the actually first book you read, or excuse me, you wrote, which I did not read, but this is the very first one that you actually did, Hunting the Beast, right?
Yeah, this is actually a novel.
Right. I was gonna say because this
My,
wasn't.
yeah, yeah. My very first work with Beyond the Fray was a novel. They were in the process of exploring whether they wanted to do fiction stuff, and
Mhm.
so I had submitted this manuscript to them back when they first got going, and they'd said that they would be interested in that kind of stuff. I didn't hear from them for a while, and then I heard back, and we ended up publishing Hunting the Beast. That book is actually based on. I published a nonfiction book after that one called Phantom Black Dogs: Walkers of the Liminal Way, and I had done a lot of the research for that book when I was writing the novel. And Hunting the Beast is actually based on a story out of England where that book, yeah, is based on a story out of England where a black dog was alleged to have shapeshifted into a human being and then
Mhm.
shapeshifted back into a black dog. And I took that idea and ran with it as the precept for my novel. This book, the one that you have the cover up for, is actually, a fairly good introduction to the Phantom Black Dog as it exists. Most people think of that phenomena as being kind of limited to Great Britain or the UK. It's not. There's actually been Phantom Black Dog reports in Canada, and
Mhm.
there's a whole rich lore of stuff that I cover in South America, or not South, but South and Central America. So this apparition is something that's seen in a lot of different places.
And it's interesting because maybe for those that are not listening to this audio format, you look at this thing, and maybe I can make it a full screen here for you, everybody, but you just see the image, and if this is what you're actually seeing, which is a great just backdrop, you got the full moon, you got a couple trees in there, and just this shadowy figure that's clearly there, but yet has the wisps on the outer edges of like, well, I'm just not really from this place, right? I'm not, if I'm here, I at least have a different ability than you do. And then, of course, the piercing red eyes, but you still have this distinct snout of the mouth and the teeth. If you legitimately see something like this, well, I mean, first of all, if you survive it, that's probably the first thought in your head, I would assume, is, am I going to even survive this? But if you've seen just an average person walking along, then they shaped this, and then back, I mean, one has to question their own sanity in that moment, wouldn't you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So, now to be fair to the Phantom Black Dog, this is a cover artist rendition of this particular apparition, and my cover artist likes to make my covers kind of scary, so and I don't mind that. I think he does a terrific job. But in a lot of instances, you do have the Phantom Black Dog that appears with the glowing red eyes and the whole schmear like that. There's also quite a number of Phantom Black Dog stories where the dog is so real appearing to the person that they think it's actually a dog and they try to pet it.
Wow.
And discover it's an apparition when their hand goes through it. Which is spooky in and of itself. It seems like, because one of the things I noticed in the research for the Phantom Black Dog book was that, you had the whole Phantom Black Dog is a portent of death thing that's very commonly seen in a lot of the lore. But there's also a whole subset of the lore about the Phantom Black Dog as a guardian spirit. And when it appears as a guardian, it frequently appears in its less scary form. And a good example of that is a story that I covered in my second book, Mysteries in the Mist, where, that one. I love it. You got covers and everything. Oh my gosh.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the really great stories about Phantom Black Dogs is this fellow was one of the first editors of the Oxford English Dictionary, and he took his family on vacation in the mountains of Great Britain, and they were out hiking one day, and they, as often happens in Great Britain, got sucked in by fog. Now, if you know that you can't see where you're going, walking around in the mountains is probably not a high percentage move. It's, if you can't see where you're going, your best bet is probably just to sit down and wait for the weather to clear.
Right.
This fellow apparently figured he knew better, and so he kept going. He was determined to walk this path. This large black dog appears from nowhere in this fog and blocks his path, won't allow him to go forward. He tries to go around the dog scoots. There's this kind of dance that they do, and this dog will not let him go. Eventually the weather clears, the fog clears, and at the same time the dog goes away, it disappears. And he discovers that if he had kept going the way he was going, he would have walked right off of a cliff.
Wow.
So yes, the Phantom Black Dog can sometimes be a guardian. And in fact, in the Canadian Monsters and Mysteries book, I also talk about a case out of Toronto. This is probably the early 1900s, if I remember correctly. This individual had emigrated back to the UK when they told their story. But what happened was that, as often happens in the Black Dog stories, this person was walking from one village to another village and then going back. And they had to go through a dark forest. And they were very afraid as they were coming up to this to this, to this darkness, this dark forest. It's spooky, right?
Yeah.
And this large black dog appears next to this young lady and walks her through the forest and then disappears. So again, you have this very ordinary looking dog, although very large dog. What people say about the black dog is that typically when these things appear, they're huge. It makes a kind of wolfhound or mastiff sized dog. It's very, very large. So she sees this dog, the dog escorts her, and there are several stories like that of the phantom black dog actually escorting people through forests, through spooky places. Actually, in one case was accompanying somebody, and they came across a group of brigands, and the dog kind of looked. Yeah,
what is that? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Oh, brigand. Oh, okay, I just wasn't sure. I was like,
robber types, and
very nice.
Yeah, and the dog, persuades them that perhaps it's not a terrific idea to try to rob this person. So the dog has in addition to its reputation as a death portent, also has a very strong guardian theme to it as well.
Very interesting, because and there's an important distinction we can make here, or I guess we should strive to make at least. And it seems that there seems to be this it all gets kind of covered in one thing. We throw one umbrella over a wolf man or a dog man or these black dog apparitions. But you're saying there seems to be a much more rich, perhaps, culture existence within these things that we're seeing, that maybe they're not just one thing like we're thinking.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that we need to see more of in the paranormal is we need to see more both and thinking. Instead of it's got to be either this, or it's always this, or this being is this thing, or however you want to put it. I think we definitely need more of that both and thinking, where we can accept that more than one thing can be true.
Yeah.
I saw a little note flash up on the screen here a minute ago. Somebody said something about black dogs guarding graveyards, and
yes.
I'd like to comment on that if you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure. I'll pull that one back up in a second here. From Brett. Thank you, Brett.
Yeah. Okay. So Brett, yeah, it's very true that that black dogs are associated with cemeteries, places of worship, some of these old burial cairns that you see in Great Britain and other places that are associated with death. There's a story in the Phantom Black Dog book about a gentleman who took his family to see one of the local cathedrals, and they were, looking at this huge historic building, and they saw a black dog appear and run down the side of this building, and then hook a left and just plunge into the side of the building. And I was thinking about this for a minute. I was like, okay, why would a black dog be running into a church? And then it dawned on me that in these cathedrals they buried people.
True.
There's also a situation where or an incident where a police constable saw one of these dogs, thought it was, a regular dog for a moment, then realized that it had glowing red eyes, and watched it run straight through a cast iron gate into the local cemetery and disappear. So, there's a strong association between dogs and death that goes back thousands of years, back to Anubis and and those kinds of things. The guardian of the death realm in a Norse mythology, which was called Hel, Hel, was actually a dog named Garm, which was a large, dark-colored dog. Kerberos, the Greek guardian of the underworld, was the three-headed dog that's described as dusky-colored, and when you see it on pots and so forth, it's depicted as black.
Yeah.
That association between the black dog and death is very common, and it's very common to see them well, not very common, but it's common to see them in graveyards, cemeteries, and those kinds of things. There's the black dog of it's in North Carolina. Crucis something or other. I can't remember the name right off the top of my head, but there have been a couple of sightings in of a large, massive, like bear-sized black dog that comes out of the cemetery at the Episcopal Church there and scares the crap out of people driving down the
massive.
road. Yeah, it's a very. It was so large that the one set of witnesses thought it was a bear. So yeah, it was a big dog.
Well, before, and I'd love, because there's, I mean, my goodness, and we're going to stay in this vein here, particularly with the you know, and maybe perhaps our listeners here just go, well, okay, he's talking about black dog. Is he saying a wolf here? Is he saying a dog man? But to be more specific about this in your own words, are you saying there's a distinct difference between the black dog apparition and, say, a dog man sighting? Or
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for one thing, the phantom black dog is never seen on two legs. Let me say very seldom seen on two legs. There was one report that I remember from Great Britain where somebody said that one stood up. I'm inclined to think that person may have actually seen what we'd now call a dog man or a man wolf. Because oftentimes those guys are the dog man wolf tend to be that dark color as well. Probably the primary difference is that the phantom black dog is absolutely an apparitional being. When people actually get close enough to one of these things to try to touch it, they can't. There are any number of stories of people actually trying to fight one.
Trying to fight it?
Yeah, there's a hysterical story from Great Britain where because they think it's just a regular dog, right? So they'll see the dog walking along behind them, and they'll try to hit it with an umbrella or something to get rid of it, and realize that this isn't your average dog when the umbrella goes right through them or through it. There's a story from South Mountain, Maryland, where this old boy's coming back from the general store. He's got some stuff that he's picked up for his family. And he's on his way back to his cabin, and this black dog appears in front of him. And I love the name of the black dog in that area. They have all these different dialectical names. This one was called Snarly Yow. I love that name. So the black dog blocks his path. And he's like, get out of my way, and the dog won't move. He's yelling at the dog and waving his arms around and stuff. And finally he decides he's just going to take a whack at this dog, right? He tries to hit the dog, and the only thing that happens is his hand goes through the dog, and the dog gets bigger. And every time he tries to hit this thing, it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger until it's just like occupying the entire space. And then abruptly it walks off and disappears. Now I have to wonder, given what we learned earlier about the dog keeping people from walking off cliffs and stuff, if this dog wasn't stopping him from wandering into a bad situation. But he was thoroughly ticked off when he got home because he'd spent all of his time trying to wail on this dog and he couldn't hit it.
Do you think, and that's an excellent observation, I think that you've made a good correlation on those, and you have several stories in your book, obviously, to kind of back that up. But do you think that, in your own words, and maybe I'll throw a couple ideas, just run them by you, but in your own words, what, and this is broad, and I get that it's big, but what do you think this is, specifically the phantom black dog, if anything?
Well, as I said, just to go back to your earlier question for just a second so I can answer that, the phantom black dog is definitely apparitional. It's hard to touch. It does sometimes have a physical effect on its environment, but most of the time you can't touch it. People who've seen these man wolves or dog men, it seems to be a solid creature. Something that makes noise as it's coming through the woods, something that growls and howls and does all these things. Not that the Phantom Black Dog doesn't, but it seems to be a much more solid creature. That if you were to reach out and touch this thing, if you were that brave, you probably put your hand on something.
Yeah.
That to me is kind of the difference. And that, and the fact that your man wolf typically displays that bipedal locomotive behavior, whereas you very, very seldom see this with the Phantom Black Dog lore. And like I said, the one story that I'm familiar with was probably actually a dogman or a man wolf.
Right.
Well,
and that was kind of one of the things I wanted to run by you, just to see what you think, as far as picking your brain. And, this is, I think one of the, it was a while ago. I can't remember if this was in an interview you did or a quote that you actually had, or maybe you were quoting someone else. So I apologize if I'm misquoting this here, but it was something along the lines of like, don't get into this line of work if you're not, if you're going to get annoyed by the mystery, as it were.
Exactly.
So, yeah. I'm paraphrasing deeply there, but
that's pretty accurate. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like if you don't have a high tolerance for mystery, this is probably not the kind of hobby or obsession that you want to develop, because I don't care whether you're talking about Phantom Black Dogs or man wolves or Sasquatches or UFOs or lake monsters or whatever it is. We're probably not going to see quote unquote solutions to these mysteries anytime soon. As far as what I think a Phantom Black Dog is, not me. In some cases, I think that we can definitely say that this is a spiritual being. However, why, in that it seems to be able to manifest itself in our world in specific locations, particularly. Mm-hmm. There's a strong correlation in the Great Britain between Phantom Black Dogs and what they call ley lines. And that's a whole other ball of wax, right? Which we probably don't have time to get into, but
right. Well, we'll certainly see where the evening takes us.
So
go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. So, the Phantom Black Dog, seems to be a manifestation of a spiritual being that's appearing on this plane for a particular reason, which seems to be associated with death in some cases, because something like 20% of the witnesses that I did a little data crunching when I was writing that book, something like 20% of the witnesses did have a death in the family or actually died themselves after seeing one of these creatures. There's that strong guardian aspect that I talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. And there is that general association with death and cemeteries, places of death and so forth, where these creatures seem to have sort of a guardian role, which is another big difference between that and the man wolf or dogman. Dogman seems to go pretty much where it wants to, although it seems to be associated a lot with indigenous burial mounds and that kind of thing. So there's probably some of that death guardian thing going on there too.
Yeah.
But that's not all it is. And I saw somebody comment earlier that the dogman is a lot of things, and I think that's probably exactly right.
Yeah.
It is very confusing, because at times it seems to be a very solid thing, and with that acts kind of like a wolf, has its own territory, and so forth. And at other times it seems to be much more mysterious. So.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you. And thank you, by the way, World Bigfoot Radio there. Dogman is more than one phenomenon, which is why people are so confused by it, or phenomenon, I should say. And that was and I love that you rolled right into that with the information in regards to perhaps somebody losing somebody, because I was going to ask you that. I said, well, hey, if these things have been known to protect people occasionally in some situations, and we're seeing a direct correlation around burial grounds, is there some sort of connection to maybe a family lineage or some sort of a spiritual, animal that's protecting them, or, you could say a guardian angel, use quotation marks on it, but, something of that nature that it seems to have. And I would think now, hearing what you said there's got to be something to that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I did. I looked at it. It's funny because the person writing the article that I looked at was actually trying to prove that phantom black dogs didn't have anything at all to do with death. And then turned right around and said, well, these person and this person and this person, blah, 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 and it turned out that something like 20% of the people who had encounters with these things either passed on themselves, or they had a death in the family, or some kind of a catastrophic accident. Something. It was a warning, basically,
right?
That something was about to occur. So, I think this is one of the functions that this particular spirit serves.
Yeah.
Is, providing that warning. And, and a lot of people there's some evidence that there are families that have these dogs associated with them. As you said, it's almost like a totem animal of death. When they see this thing, somebody's in the family's about to go. There's one story I think we keep going back to the Phantom Black Dog book. But
oh, that's okay.
There's one story in the Phantom Black Dog book where a young lady and her mother are taking a tour of Great Britain by car, right? And they encounter a black dog that actually runs along about 40 yards ahead of the car. And mom is freaking out. So they stop at a local pub or, way station of some kind. They stop, and she makes sure that the people that run this place leave out food for this thing. Basically, she's making an offering to it, right?
Yeah.
Which I thought was very interesting. They proceeded on their way, and not long afterwards, mom falls ill, has to go back to whatever their hometown was, London or whatever, goes into hospital and passes on.
Aww.
Unexpectedly, right? So there it was, there's that whole thing where the dog shows up, and she knew, the person who was telling the story found out later that this was a thing in their family, that if you saw this dog, then, you were done for. And she responded by doing something that's very common in fairy lore, and, trying to make an offering to this thing to get it to leave her alone.
Wow. Well, and that was kind of what I was going to ask you, and to transition just a little bit here into this idea of the mist, or this heavy fog that's sometimes referred to. Is there some sort of correlation between that and the Phantom Black Dog, or is that its own entity in and of itself, even though we might just disregard it as mist or fog?
Yeah, so my second book was entitled Mysteries in the Mist, Fog and Clouds and the Paranormal. And that book got started when somebody was when I was doing another interview, and we were talking about signs of paranormal incursion. Now, Jenny Randles, the UFO author, proposed something called the Oz effect. And she was talking specifically about UFOs, but this stuff really applies to a lot of paranormal incidences. And the Oz effect is basically what I call the silence. Suddenly sound around you becomes dampened or completely disappears, right? The birds go quiet, everything goes quiet.
Yeah.
There's a sense, oftentimes, you hear this a lot in Bigfoot encounters where, people think they're being watched, or the sense that something's about to happen. And the third thing in the Oz effect is some kind of time distortion. Time goes too fast, time goes too slow, there's missing time, that kind of stuff. So this other person and I were talking about other signs of paranormal incursion, and this individual is very into the idea of anomalous lights as a sign of these paranormal incursions. And I got to thinking, because I remembered this story of the phantom black dog appearing from the mist. I got to thinking, I wonder if these mists are maybe something that happens as a part of paranormal incursion, spiritual incursion, whatever you want to call them. So after I got done writing the Phantom Black Dog book, I started doing a little research on that and went down the rabbit hole and discovered, there's a definite correlation. In some cases, you have situations where it seems like the creature, whatever it is, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or the man wolf, those kinds of things, even some of these flying things, appear out of the fog. For instance, one of Linda Godfrey's one of her first cases was, I think her last name was Gibson, Doris Gibson, who was driving down a foggy road, thought she hit something, got out of her car and was charged by one of these creatures and jumped back in her car and drove away, and it scraped down the side of her car. So is the creature making the fog? Is the creature using the fog as cover? Not clear, right? We don't know for sure. But it's definitely using the fog as a kind of cover to approach people, things, whatever. But then as I got deeper into this subject, I found some just bizarre stories about fogs that were causing effects. And I've done whole interviews just on this stuff, but a good example of this, and my favorite story from that book, is a young man, his last name was Henshaw, I believe. He was riding a motorcycle in Great Britain. It was a rather nasty summer, apparently. There was a lot of rain, and he was riding in the rain. He was soaking wet. So he's got his riding gear and all this stuff on. He's riding along. He looks in his rearview mirror, and behind him he sees a purple light. He's like, I wonder what that is. He thought, maybe there was a car going to overtake him. So he got over because the visibility was bad. He didn't want to get run off the road or run over. Nothing comes up on him, but sometime after that, a Jaguar motor car comes up and passes him, starts to go up this hill, and this cloud descends on both of them that has these purplish pinkish highlights. He described it, and his bike instantly goes dead. The motor kicks out, his electrical system, his headlights, everything goes out.
Wow. At the same time, my heart would go out too.
Yeah. And the same thing happens to the Jaguar that's just ahead of him, right? Now, the really weird part about this is not only did all the electronics die, but they kept moving. And whatever this thing was hauled them up a hill, and not just on a flat surface, up a hill and over the crest of the hill before it disappeared. And as soon as it disappeared, a couple of things happen. All the electronics come back. He's able to restart his bike, and he notices that he's dry. And when he reaches down and puts his hand on the tank of his motorcycle, it's warm to the touch. So
interesting. But if I'm hoping to understand you correctly, you're implying that this, or that they have said from their story, that this levitated them essentially.
It basically they didn't float up into the air. They just were pulled up the side of this hill.
Gotcha. What do you even do? Like, how do you report that? You know what I mean?
It's like an anti-gravity cloud, right?
Yeah.
And that was just the tip of the weirdness that I found when I was exploring this, when I was doing this book. There are stories in the book about, that's fogged up. I like that.
That's pretty good, Haley.
There are stories in the book about that happened in South America, in Argentina. This fella, is a businessman. He's driving around Argentina doing whatever it is business people do when they're driving around places. He spends the night in a hotel. He goes out to his new car and starts it up. And he is encompassed by this cloud.
Now, when you say cloud, if I may ask, and you may or may not know the answer, but when you say encompass, are you saying just something that kind of surrounds the vehicle?
Yep.
Or are we saying the hotel as a whole? Or I guess it'd be hard to tell from this
it was very specifically targeted on him for whatever reason, right?
Interesting. Okay.
Now, here's the kicker. One minute he's sitting outside this hotel, and the next minute he's in a town. Forget the distance, but it's several hundred kilometers away. He finds himself standing on the roadside. He flags down a truck and asks for a ride into town. He goes to the local police station, and they think he's drunk, right? It's like he's got to be high because there's no way this could happen, right? The police there call the police in the town where he was, and they go to the hotel, and his car is sitting out front of this hotel, and it's still running.
Wow. They had to have thought he was full of it, right? When he first came. What do? You stumble into the police station he probably didn't even know where he was at, right? I would assume.
He wasn't sure where he was, yeah.
Oh my goodness!
And the next thing you know, he's I made a point of figuring out how fast you'd have to go to get from point A to point B in that short a time period. And it's just like there was no aircraft or anything at that time, or even now, that would go fast enough to get him from point A to point B. Even if he just, jumped out of his car and into the plane and it was still going, right? Not to mention taking off and all that other stuff, right? So there's just no way. And his was not the only case of that happening. There was a doctor and his wife who had the same thing happen to them, drove into a yellow cloud in Argentina.
These colored clouds. This is so intriguing.
And found themselves in Mexico. They had to drive back to Argentina from Mexico. Because, and they had no idea how they got, and it was an instantaneous teleportation too. It was like 1 minute they're in Argentina, next minute they're in Mexico.
But they went with their vehicle.
And they went with the vehicle. Yeah. So, yeah, and there's a case out of Japan where these fellas from Tokyo, 4 guys are driving in their car and they're going to the local golf course to, play around, and they see a white Nissan pass them, drives into a cloud, and disappears completely. Now, who knows where that person ended up? They could have ended up in Russia or something for all we know. So it just, those things, those stories were the ones that really, when I was researching Mysteries in the Mist, I was like, whoa.
Yeah. Well, and a couple things. By the way, someone asked earlier in the chat, as we have about 10 minutes at the top of the hour, we will take a quick 5-minute break, where they could get all of your books. And once again, guys, I have dropped a link in the chat several times, and it is also going to be in the show notes. But just to have a list of them here for you guys, this is where they're at on Amazon, obviously, and this is where you guys can go and you can get them. It looks like either on Kindle or as well as through these guns. And I believe you have paperback as well as audio format.
Yeah, so they're all Amazon books, and they are available on both Kindle and as paperbacks. So, and just to remind people, because all of the books kind of get grouped together, Hunting the Beast is actually fiction. So it's actually a novel, okay? It is based on my research in Black Dog lore, but I want people to understand that it is actually a novel. Now, I am happy for you to read that book.
There you go. Well, that was one of the first ones, like you said, that you had done, correct?
It was the first book that I published with Beyond the Fray. And
it's a great backdrop, too.
Isn't that a great cover?
Oh, yeah. I really do. You get the shot of, obviously, the big man himself right back. I assume that's what's going on there.
Sasquatch actually plays a critical role in the book.
Very nice.
And this little emblem here is a rune circle.
Oh,
And
nice.
you will find that runes play an important part in the book as well. So,
Very
um,
intriguing. Well, I know a lot of people. I most certainly, I didn't even know you had. I had the other one that had been sent to me. I didn't know about these other additional ones. So I am actually excited myself as well. I'm always looking for a good book here and then. Now, I don't have to admit I might cheat. I don't read them, guys. I'm a better listener than I am reader sometimes. So, if you can forgive me there, well, maybe we'll call it. We'll call it.
what I'll say about that, Will, is that my books, I try to put a lot of material into a more limited space. Okay. My books, I try not to write these massive tomes that take you, 10 years to read. I want people to be able to sit down and look at the book and read through the book and find a bunch of cool stories, and it's a quick, pleasurable read. That's kind of my thing. Excuse me, when I was a
Let's.
kid, uh, my favorite authors were people like Frank Edwards, who wrote like the Strange World, Stranger Than
Mhm.
Science, and those books. I love those books because you'd sit down, you could read a story here or there, and you could set it down. You come back and read some more stuff, when you had a little time. That's kind of what I shot for. Was this idea that there's all of this wild paranormal stuff out there, um, and I want people to be able to read these stories and look at these stories and say, okay, well, I can read a little of this tonight, and then tomorrow night I can read a little more, or maybe I'm more interested in this section and that section, blah blah blah. With Mysteries in the Mist and the Canadian Monsters and Mysteries book, both, if you have an interest in the paranormal, there's probably something in that book for you.
Yeah.
Because both books, go all the way from cryptids through fairies to UFOs to you name it. There's something in there you're probably going to like.
Very true. Well, and I was going to say, I know we only have about 6 minutes, actually less than that, a couple of minutes, just about 2-3 minutes here before we take our quick little break at the top of the hour. But just looking at this too, if you're from Canada, guys, and even if you're not, but especially if you are, right, it's the Canadian Monsters and Mysteries. How can you not go out and get a little peek at that? And again, just another great backdrop on the lone cabin with the mountains in the background there, and
Doug
just
Hogan
a
does a
hint.
great job on my covers. I have used the same cover artist for every book I've done with BTF, and I'm just so happy with his work.
Yeah.
So this particular book came about as a result of moving to Canada. As I said, my spouse got a job at the University of Waterloo here in the Kitchener-Waterloo area. And
Yeah.
I moved here in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, which was not an easy feat, believe me. We had about a month to move in, and we had to pull together an international move,
Oh my goodness.
in that time period. So it was quite a feat. But once I got up here, of course, I have no status yet, or I had no status at that time, so I couldn't work. So I had plenty of time to do some research on weirdness in Canada.
Yeah.
And so this book is the result of that time period. So,
I love it.
and again, uh, one of the things that I found. How are we doing for time?
Oh, yep. We have about a
Okay.
minute and 20 seconds, so we're good.
Okay. So I don't want to run you over or anything.
No worries.
So what I found as I was doing the research was I was going to have to target more closely with this book. So I didn't do Sasquatch in this one. That's going to be a book of its own. I didn't do hauntings in this one because there are ghost stories deluxe out here. I didn't do the Wendigo because another BTF author has done a really terrific book on the Wendigo and Wendigo lore. And I didn't cover the Lake Champlain monster, Champ, because again, there's a researcher who's very into that and doing a lot of work with that. And I didn't see a reason to tromp on toes doing that. But there's still a ton of stuff in this book that's just like there's all kinds of fun cryptid stuff in the book. There's UFOs, there's fairies, and all that kind of stuff. So again, it covers a lot of ground in a short period of time.
Most certainly. Well, speaking of that, since we have mentioned the book, obviously, we've dropped a link for that as well, and it's in the chat there, or excuse me, in the show notes. And when we come back, I think that'd be a great place to kind of pick up. We'll go into some of the big man stories himself, as well as maybe UFOs and wherever that takes us. And don't forget, I cannot forget this one. Before it's all over and done, we've got to talk about some missing time stuff, because that's certainly, and I know that goes back to perhaps the myths and stuff a little bit, but when we come back at the top of the hour here, we're certainly going to dive into some of the Bigfoot stuff and where that began for you personally, as well as the book and some other things that you've hit that way. So
the Bigfoot stuff is stuff I'm working on right now. It's not in this particular book, but I can certainly speak to that. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. There we go. As long as you've got some good old Bigfoot stories for us, because, that's what everybody comes around for. They call him the Bigfoot, the big man on campus when it comes to the cryptids for a reason, right? He kind of is the reigning king and champion in that area. Matter of fact, I'm taking my wife, looked it up, my wife and my 3 little ones are going to there's like a Yeti convention going on here locally for us for a little festival. So it's going to be a good time. Yeah, I think Rick Shaw is going to be there, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So anyways, guys, we'll be right back. We're going to take a quick little break here, as we always say. We're going to go ahead and fill up on whatever you may be drinking this night. For me, it's some good old coffee as well. It sounds like that is for Travis as well.
Oh, yes.
If you have not taken a chance to hit the like button, please do so. Share with a friend. And don't forget, while we're on break, you guys, I will drop the links to his books once more so that you can click on those and go check them out. And we'll be back here in about 5 minutes. So hang in there with us. We'll be right back. Top of hour 2 here with Mr. W.T. Watson, or as he prefers to go by, Travis, who I gotta tell you is just sharing some fantastic stories with us tonight. Stuff that I'm jotting down. I'm gonna make sure I go back and look into more, a little more deeply, because it's just not enough, right? He's got like he's like the restaurant that has the perfect amount of appetizers where you're like, oh my gosh, that's perfect. But then as you're just finishing the savory of that taste or that flavor, you're right on to the next thing. So having said that, Travis, I'm gonna bring you back on here. Thank you for joining us this fine Friday evening. Well, I suppose depending where you're at, East Coast for us, it's already Saturday, right? We're already into the weekend here.
It is definitely Saturday morning.
It most certainly is. And we surely do appreciate you coming on and sharing these just absolutely fascinating stories that, something that I think that you do a great job at in the book, and both when you're sharing in your interviews here too, and that we don't always realize is that behind each one of these little things you're sharing, well, we look at them as little because, maybe they're 3 or 5 minutes we're talking about it. There's a whole story. You could do a whole episode, an hour of just conversation on these things, And I think you do. I definitely commend you for your ability to share them, encapsulate them in that quick little hitter, because that's something I'm not very good at. So I salute you for that. That's for sure.
Well, I have had a fair amount of experience now doing interviews. When I first started doing this, it was kind of scary because I was in that situation where it's like, I've got all of this stuff in my head and I don't know what to do with it. It just took a while to get to that place where, you can kind of encapsulate the story, get it out there, hopefully catch people's interest and then go with it, answer any questions or whatever. So, I mean, it's experience, I guess.
Well, that's true. But, and even with all that experience, how difficult has it been for you when someone says, well, tell me a story that makes you think Bigfoot's real? I mean, has that got to be a difficult question when somebody asks you that, do you think, if you're just at somewhere grabbing a coffee or maybe a brewski?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I find hardest about what I do is when people ask me, well, so what do you do? And I tell them, oh, I'm a writer. And they're like, what do you write? I write books on the paranormal. You're kind of looking at the ceiling because you're going to get that. Every once in a while you get the person who's like, oh, cool. And they'll want to talk about, ghosts or whatever. But a lot of time you get and they start to sidle away from you a little bit.
I'm done with this conversation. This guy over here.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to go stand over on this side of the room because this guy is weird, which is true. I am weird, and I freely admit it. But this is my obsession, and if that's not you, then that's fine. I'm good with that. You don't have to talk to me. But going back to that Bigfoot question you were answering, or you were asking a minute ago, as I said, the Canadian Monsters and Mysteries book specifically doesn't cover Bigfoot because there's so much of it. If I had included that, I would have had to write, Ivan Sanderson's 700-page opus on the abominable snowman, right? And I didn't want to do that. So when people ask me about Sasquatch, first of all, I'm convinced that there's something weirder going on there than just a giant, hairy hominid running around in the forest. Sometimes. This is where the both and thinking comes in. I have no problem believing that there is a relic Gigantopithecus or, hairy hominid or, giant bipedal ape or whatever in some of these remote regions. But then when you read stuff like Timothy Renner and Joshua Cutchin's Where the Footprints End, and you see some of the high strangeness that's attached to I just lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. Some of the high strangeness that's attached to some Bigfoot sightings, you realize that there may be a physical entity out there, but there's also something else out there that looks like a Bigfoot anyway. And one of the things that I've noted in my research on Sasquatch so far is Native people, Indigenous people, almost universally believe in this creature. and they almost universally assume that it's, something that lives in this world and the other world both. I don't know,
Right.
but there's something there. There are
Yes.
thousands of Sasquatch reports, and a certain number of those things may be misidentifications of bears and so on and so forth, but there are also a lot of good close range sightings of these creatures by very credible witnesses, hunters, law enforcement officers. We have Sasquatch sightings of, the guy was a hunter standing there. He glassed this thing with a scope on his rifle. I mean, when you look at this thing at that close up, you're looking at something. You can tell whether you're looking at a bear or not.
Exactly. Especially, and this, and being an outdoorsman, you'd think this is a little more their realm of expertise, right? This is kind of what they do.
Yeah,
You'd hope they could identify that.
And then, and it's not just that. You have, there's one of the books that I talk about pretty extensively in the Canadian Monsters and Mysteries book is Strange Creatures Seldom Seen. It's by a guy named Worms. The last name is Warms, and it is only available online. Right? It's not like an Amazon book or anything you can find on Kindle or anything like that. But he had apparently an inn with the First Nations people in Manitoba, and collected a lot of interesting cryptid fairy type lore from them, including some Sasquatch reports. Now, let me tell you something. These people not only hunt and fish and trap for a living, but also to feed their families.
Yeah.
They know the wildlife in their area upside down, backward, forward, sideways, and they've been living on that land for thousands of years. Now tell me that somebody like that who sees a Sasquatch in the woods and tells somebody about it. A lot of times they won't talk about these things, but when they do, they know what they saw. It wasn't a freaking bear.
Right. Do you have you found through any of your research or experiences with any of the Indigenous people that it's kind of, one could almost equate it, I guess, to say the jinn or the jinn or the din over in the Middle East, where it's just kind of an accepted fact of life. It's not really mythical whatsoever. Have you found that kind of mindset with some of the Indigenous people, say in Canada even?
I haven't had
or just in general?
Haven't had a chance to directly interview them, but it certainly seems to be the case from, I've looked at documentaries, I've looked at books, I've looked at, and then you have Kathy Strain's work in the United States, where she's gone through and related Sasquatch tales from tribes all over the country. And I can't remember the name of that book off the top of my head, but, so I know amongst the Lakota, that white people call the Sioux, that the big man, I think they call it, is just an accepted fact. I mean, it's just something that exists out there. And they just accept that this thing is there, and they also accept that it's a spiritual being too. The fact is, we don't know what Sasquatch is, and until we do know for sure, one way or the other, there's plenty of room for people across the continuum. One of the things about Sasquatch research that makes me crazy is that there's, somebody said Kathy Muskowitz Strain, giants, cannibals, and monsters. Thank you.
Yes, thank you there.
Thank you, World Bigfoot Radio. I think there should be more room in Sasquatch research for alternate viewpoints than just the flesh and blood hypothesis, or the people who want to say that it's an alien creature, bred by, I mean, there's a wide continuum there. I'm an animist. I believe that there's a vast ecosystem of spirit out there.
Yeah.
And that some of that spirit is capable of manifesting itself in very physical ways in this world. And that may be something that's happening with Sasquatch, the dogmen, and that kind of stuff. There could be also a physical creature. I can't say, well, I am the authority, and this is the way it is, because I'm not, and nobody else is either.
Well, one thing would make you have to at least wonder. Well, at the very least, we know that these stories, I use it quotation mark, stories or legends or lore, go back for, at this point, guys, millennia. Yeah, like I said, you go back to Anubis and different things that have been in existence along mankind, as it were. And it always makes me wonder just a little bit. I'd love to pick your brain on this. Is there any chance that he gets too labeled as just the big man or Bigfoot, but is there some sort of, like earth element to this, some sort of a spirit element with earth that seems to be involved, even separate from, like you said, a hominid kind of creature?
Okay.
Do you think there's something of that nature going on?
Okay, so I'm going to go off the reservation a little bit here.
Let's do it.
Okay. So in my novel, Hunting the Beast, I posit that Sasquatch is actually a species of wild fae. Okay.
Ooh.
And that's kind of how I think of them in the majority of circumstance, because the fairy, whether we're talking about in Celtic lands, whether we're talking Newfoundland, there's plenty of fairy lore in Newfoundland.
Yes.
Nova Scotia as well. This is a whole subset of spiritual beings who are able to manifest physically in our world, right? So, when I think about Sasquatch, I'm thinking along that line. And so, I think that there's I forgot what your question was now.
Oh, you're okay. No, we were discussing the fact that, Bigfoot could legitimately be, this creature that does physically exist. But is there an element to this where it is, maybe an ancient earth spirit of some sort, or guardian, we could even say, or whatever that might be?
So, one of the things that the native people say a lot, it seems to be divided kind of down the middle. There's a lot of native legends that see these creatures as like these things that snatch maidens in the night, and or that snatch people up and take them off in the woods and eat them. On the other hand, there's a whole set of native lore where Bigfoot is basically, or Sasquatch is basically, the guardian of the wilderness, right?
Exactly.
In fairy lore that I was talking about earlier, there's one of the things that we don't realize is that fairy are not Tinkerbell. Okay.
Mm-mm.
For one thing, and they're not just one thing. Exactly. There's if you read books like the Catherine Briggs books on fairy folklore, there's a wide range of fairy beings. And she says herself that she hasn't even begun to document all of them.
Yeah, like Duke saying, fae are very dangerous, and all exclamation points.
They can be very dangerous. There are subspecies of the fae that are actually helpful if you make the right offerings to them. Now, and this is where I go off the reservation a little bit.
That's okay. We're on the woo train here. We're supposed to do that.
Pleasure of meeting a fellow named R.J. Stewart back in the 90s. He is a gentleman from Scotland. And he works specifically. He's what is called, in some places, a fairy seer. So he actually has contact with these beings on a regular basis. And I did a seminar with him. And one of the things that came through in the seminar was just how varied the ecosystem of the fairy is. In my particular vision, I guess you would say, I encountered beings that were. Do you remember the Ents from Lord of the Rings?
Yes.
The walking trees,
Yes.
kind of like that. Okay,
Wow.
so I think it's entirely possible that, again, I don't want to poo-poo the flesh and blood people for Sasquatch.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say that there's not a relic hominid out there somewhere, but I also think that there may be a fairy species that looks like that and that
Mm.
people are seeing that may serve that guardian role that Native people talk about. You notice that in some of these Sasquatch encounters that people are having, um, you know, creature's fairly benign. It's sitting there. I was reading a story today where the Sasquatch was sitting in a river splashing water on itself.
Mm.
And these folks walked up and it kind of looked at them and took off into the woods. No big deal, right? But you also have these situations where people come into a specific area and it seems that the Sasquatch are really intent on getting rid of them. One of the interesting stories, do you remember the Monster Quest? I don't, or you may not. There was a Monster Quest episode called Sasquatch Attacks. Okay, it's just
Okay.
kind of cheesy, but
It was a tagline, right?
it takes place. It takes place in Snellgrove Lake in northern Ontario, which is a place that you have to fly into. You can't get there by road, right?
Okay.
And so they are at this cabin out there in the middle of nowhere, and the Sasquatch or something, some forced poltergeist activity, is raining rocks on this cabin and stuff. And they've had some actual sightings and stuff out there. So it seems like there are some places that you go into the Sasquatch doesn't want you in. That they're doing a guardian, and a lot of people are like, oh well, they're just being territorial apes. I don't know. It may be that that particular area of the forest is a place you shouldn't go for whatever reason.
Yeah.
They may be protecting, other animals. They may be protecting plants. Remember, in the animist perspective, there are spirits in everything.
Yes.
So the Sasquatch may be protecting a particular area of woods from incursion by humans.
Very true.
So, and again, I realize that's probably a little off the reservation. Some people get all, oh, it's woo, and and that's fine.
Well, that's what we're all about here at Spaced Out Radio. We're all about the woo train and the woo. Trust you me.
Yeah. So, I'm firmly of the opinion that Sasquatch can be more than one thing, and that's where I kind of set on it.
Well, now, let's say this then. Let's say you and I just met and we're having a conversation about this. And I said, well, give me one case where you believe it was a tangible, hominid kind of thing, not something that was spirit created. Is there a story you can think of that is more specific to that than something of a spiritual manner? Where maybe it left physical evidence, damage to things or anything of that nature?
Well, I think that... let me draw back for just a minute.
Yeah.
One of the things that a lot of Sasquatch researchers get excited about is this whole rock throwing business, right?
You do get excited about the rocks.
They get excited about the rocks, and the rocks are cool, and the tracks and all that kind of stuff, right? And that's, I completely understand that. However, I was talking to another researcher, and one of the things that he pointed out was, if you took the phenomena that Sasquatch researchers get excited about out in the woods, short of a visual sighting, right, and you plopped it into a house, your local parapsychologist would call it poltergeist activity.
That is true. Generally speaking, yeah. So
that's something to consider. Now, as far as your question about, is there a story that I say that I'm like, oh, well, this is proof of a physical creature? you can't really prove that there's a physical creature. Probably the best evidence that we have that there's a physical creature is all those track casts that Jeff Meldrum has in his lab. There's something making those footprints.
Yeah.
Again, you know, I don't completely rule out the idea that there's a relic hominid or something along that line out there, or, you know, some kind of a materialized spirit being. But just the sheer number of sightings, you know, I swear I'm going to title one of the chapters in my next book, "Why Did the Bigfoot Cross the Road?"
Just on the road part, that's true. That, I mean, the truckers.
Every freaking time you open, you know, any, you know, database that has Bigfoot sightings in it, or open any book that has Bigfoot sightings in it, it seems like 75% of the time they're walking along the side of the road and they just decide to go across the street, right?
Yeah, it does seem that way.
Okay, you know, and why? It's like, you know, if this creature is so intent on playing hide and seek with us, then why on earth are they, you know, do they not just wait a few minutes and let the car go by?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I understand that there are tracks and scat and the DNA study and all that kind of stuff. Again, I'm not saying that there's not a physical creature out there. I'm just saying that there may be a whole lot more than that. But, you know, just the sheer number of people who happen across this critter, and, you know, it seems to them to be a very physical animal, and it behaves in a very physically animal way. You know, it acts a lot like an ape, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's the stories of people who encounter them on trackways, and they're people. I'm laughing at your comment section here.
They're having fun tonight.
They are having a blast, aren't they? There's stories of people who encounter these creatures, and it makes that little whoop sound.
Yes.
It's like, I'm here. You probably don't want to come any closer. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, if I saw a big freaking ape out in the woods, I would start backing up slowly. You know, I mean, I make no bones about that. You know.
Right.
I've encountered some interesting things in the woods, and you know, I've walked away slowly and everything was fine. Right. So yeah, and I don't pretend to be a Sasquatch expert. I'm working on that with this book, but you know, that's kind of where I sit with the Sasquatches.
You know, I have to wonder too. Now, this is just purely speculative. Like, clearly everything I talk about speculative, it seems, is, yeah, it almost feels like sometimes, you know, if these particular beings, these creatures, maybe creatures too far, this being, you know, Bigfoot, whatever it is, if they have this just immense, first of all, physical ability, right? No one questions the physicality of these things. Mm-hmm. And then it has been said to, you know, maybe even we'll move into the realms of mind speak or just sense and knowing things are there. But then you hit on a great point, which is that they're like surprised. Like, ooh, oh man, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
Even as it was brought up earlier in the chat that the Patterson Gimel footage is still some of the best evidence out there.
Yep.
It makes you wonder. I hate this. Sometimes I have a hate-love relationship with what I'm about to say because it could just be thrown on anything. But it just feels like the thinning of the veil. Like almost they didn't know we were there because we weren't there a minute ago. So just like we're seeing these phantom, you know, black dogs or just something appearing in apparition, I wonder if we're the same thing to them. If sometimes all of a sudden there's just a road there. They were just walking through the forest. They seen something of curiosity, and now maybe I'm getting too far out there with it, but it just sometimes, like you said, they seem surprised themselves. Not always, but there are some times where it's just like they had no clue.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the case that, you know, you sometimes have that feeling, you know. And
Bim Jim says aliens brought Sasquatch here through time.
Yeah, if you read some of Stan Gordon's work, you might believe that. There's a gentleman in Pennsylvania. I don't know if you know who Stan Gordon is, but Stan's written
briefly
some books, you know, that you know, kind of set the whole physical Bigfoot thing on their head, because he's gotten some really wacky, cases there in Pennsylvania back in the 70s. So again, there's all this weirdness that surrounds Sasquatch, and we don't know what this critter is. I'll grant that there is lots of good physical evidence, but to me, the best evidence is the anecdotal evidence. And I know that all the scientists are like, oh, well, anecdotal evidence, blah, blah, blah. If I took all of the stuff that has been gathered about Sasquatches and took it into a court of law, and I could actually get an impartial jury, there would be absolutely no doubt about what the verdict would be. Because you've got thousands of witnesses, you've got all of this physical evidence of footprints and so forth. I mean, just the fact that you have a world-renowned anthropologist whose specialization is bipedal locomotion, who's looking at these tracks going, hey, something made these tracks. Yeah, man, yeah.
I love this from Fylth, one of our great guys. We're on the bookings team. He drew this. It's Stan Gordon. Bigfoot, may I get a quick word with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Bigfoot himself. How's this guy keeping pace? Mr. Grantavius with the Power Stash is saying, I was within 30 feet of a Sasquatch. Mine was gray and moved very gracefully.
Yeah, and that's one of the continuing things that you see in Sasquatch reports is everybody comments that there's no way that this could be a bear walking on its hind legs, because it moves so gracefully, so skillfully, and so quickly.
Yeah.
I've seen some reports where people were saying, if you were an Olympic runner, you couldn't keep up with this thing walking.
Yeah.
So
just from the gait, the legs.
Yeah, that's not a bear.
No, generally not. Generally not a bear. And there's videos, we've all seen it. We know the bears can get up and walk around their hind legs a little bit, but they look a little awkward doing it.
I can walk around on all fours if I really put my mind to it. That doesn't mean that I'm going to do it.
That's very true. Now, obviously, since some of the good listeners here tonight have brought up the idea of possibly, the UFO or the alien end of this, so kind of transitioning into that a little bit, what are your thoughts and or feelings or stories in regards to this idea? Is that separate from all of this, or is there some sort of correlation to this as well?
Oh, boy. Yeah. So this is one of those questions that people ask me, and I'm always like, oh, boy. All right. Well, in my opinion, and this is strictly my opinion, I believe that there's some kind of intelligence behind all of this stuff. Call it a trickster, call it a god, call it, spirit, call it whatever you want.
Yeah.
You can attach whatever but it seems to me that, particularly with the UFO phenomena, maybe Sasquatch too, but particularly with the UFO phenomena, that these things want to be seen, okay, and that the technology that they're displaying is just advanced enough to get people's attention without freaking them out so hard that they just fail to report it at all. Going all the way back to the airships in the 1800s, we see an evolution of UFOs. First of all, it's this weird thing that looks like a dirigible with bright lights on it, and it has people get out of it and make you pancakes and stuff.
That is true. Not good ones, not flavorful ones,
not flavorful,
but they certainly made them a little flat. But hey, need some yeast there, maybe.
And then you have then you get a progression. You get, the Foo Fighters during World War II. You get the ghost rockets after that. Then you go into the 40s, late 40s, and you get, or I guess during that too. Then you move into the flying saucer period after Kenneth Arnold happens. And then you start to get the cigar-shaped things like what my father saw.
Yeah.
And then you get, now we're getting into the giant, what do you call those things? The giant triangles and all that sort of stuff, right? It seems like the technology of the UFOs progresses as our technologies progress. And I know there are people out there, well, that's because we're using alien technology and all that stuff. It's, maybe, who's to say?
Right.
But it seems like it's very deliberately done to keep our attention.
Mm-hmm.
And it's particularly evident to me in the UFO field. But if you think about, cryptids, for instance, Sasquatch is still all the rage, obviously. But you
Yeah.
notice that you have these, it's almost like waves of different cryptid sightings, right? So you'll get a whole bunch of dogman or man-wolf sightings for a while. And then people will start seeing giant birds, and that, there's this whole thing going on in the Midwest with Mothman, right?
Yeah.
Tobias Wayland and those guys are doing a lot of research on these sightings, right? Um, over here in Canada, someplace we have white humanoids, these humanoid weird rape things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you get all this weird stuff, right? And it's like, oh, you go to Arizona or someplace and you get the skinwalkers, right? People are seeing these things that are racing along besides cars and stuff.
Very true.
Always seems like trying to come up with something new to grab our attention.
Mm.
And then we start creating our own crap, like the Slender Man thing.
Yes.
Where you had a situation, in magical lore, there's a belief that you can create thought forms if you have the will, the desire, and the imagination to do it. And so you had these people writing about this being in this creepy pasta place, right? And they're infusing all of this terror and energy and fear into this thing, and before you know it, it's loose. And yeah, tulpa is one word for it. I like to call them thought forms because tulpa is kind of a Tibetan word. It's something. But yeah, tulpa, thought form. Thought form is more of the Western esoteric word for it, and so that's kind of what I tend to call them. But you got that. You have these. Not only does it seem like the intelligence is creating these things to get our attention, but we're creating our own things. So I've just gotten completely out of hand.
No, I think you hit an important thing here, because let's just, for the fun of it, we're already off the rails here, right? We got about 24 minutes left here or so of the show. Let's step back from this a little bit. You bring up a great point, and man, for the life of me, I can never remember the saying exactly how I want to say it, which is something along the lines of, what is it? In times of need or desperation is the mother of all invention. Something along. I'm murdering all these sayings tonight, but
necessity is involved.
Thank you. Now, this may not be necessity, but what I would say is, if you can weaponize, in a sense, I know that term's been overused by others, people's curiosity, and harness that ability, that drive to just want to know why, it causes us to think a little deeper than just the 9-to-5 kind of lifestyle. What else is there? And if we can just go a little deeper, maybe there really is something saying, hey, we can't come right out. Maybe, remember on the old Star Trek, there was what was the rule they had? When they would go down to a planet.
The Prime Directive.
The Prime Directive, thank you. And you couldn't, directly interfere with it. But what if you could just make them curious of other things? So you didn't directly come out and say things, but you're letting them know, hey, there's a lot more going on here than you think. Yes. Especially with the things that seems that we're manifesting.
Right.
Because maybe we are, but it's got to give you a hint that maybe the mind really truly can take you farther than you can imagine, right? There's got to be something to that.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely something to it. One of the things that I don't think gets enough attention is the extensive research that's been done on psychic ability. There's plenty of evidence now, even though mainstream science won't accept it. There's plenty of evidence now to indicate that the telepathy is a real thing. that
Mm-hmm.
psychokinesis is a real thing. We know these things actually happen, and they can get them to go in the lab. So the human mind is something that, and consciousness, and what consciousness is something that we have to factor into our calculations when we're looking at these various phenomena. Because, for instance, I talk about in the Phantom Black Dog book, I'm going to go back to that again for a minute.
Yeah, no problem. Let's do it.
There are, okay, or we can use the example of Sasquatch, and why did the Sasquatch cross the road, right? You have a situation where you have people who are driving down the road, and what happens when you drive down the road for extensive period of times? You'd zone out, right?
Very true. Yes,
We've
all done that.
What we know is that the psychic abilities work best when we're relaxed and in that sort of alpha state of consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know this from parapsychological research. It's a fact. It's not just some thing that somebody made up somewhere. So we have these people, they're driving down the road, they're kind of zoned out. Who's to say that some of these things are not actually spontaneous psychic occurrences, where the individual is actually looking into the other world for a while? Whether we're talking about Bigfoot, whether we're talking about the Phantom Black Dogs, any of these kinds of things. I'm not saying that that's the only explanation, or that's the explanation, or there's one explanation to rule them all. But there's a certain subset of things where that's entirely possible, because we don't have, the person jumping out of the car and running over there and grabbing the Sasquatch or whatever. They see it. It seems real to them, but they may be having a spontaneous psychic occurrence. We don't know.
Well, and the thing is about that, I mean, like you said, for people to kind of question anymore, and I get that maybe it's not everything that's happening to everybody, but it's getting to a point to where it has been tested. I mean, this is stuff that, I mean, I suppose this goes on a whole other route, but we always say when something starts to become public knowledge, generally speaking, that means they probably moved on from that thing, right? Or they've certainly figured out whatever they needed to figure out if the general populace, and like you said, for it to be researched and studied, which it has been for years. I mean, they were studying, probably humans have been studying the ability with, psychic abilities for forever. But certainly since the late 1800s on, and took it very seriously. Actually, but there was massive stuff throughout the mid-1800s, with everybody in the Civil War losing all their family members. But anyways, he moved forward to where we actually seen like the CIA has declassified documents showing the different programs they ran and things studying directly to this, and most certainly Russia and the things that they went through. I'd have to think that it's not too far-fetched to believe that those are possibilities. I mean, certainly on our own cryptid huntress here, Jessica Jones, who has her own show on tomorrow night evening there, she does remote viewing.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think it's gotten to a point to where if people want to look into this, it's not like in the old days, maybe where you could just brush off and, those are the crazy people to talk about this. Now it's, we've really got to sit here and think about it if you're going to try and disprove this thing. And I appreciate, one of the things I appreciate you doing also in your book, as well as when we're doing these interviews, is that you don't say, hey, this is the answer. You're simply saying, I don't know, and that's fascinating. But you should look into it.
I mean, that's what keeps people in the field, is that it's a mystery, and human beings love mystery. I want to backstep for just a minute to something you said earlier. Where there's the idea or the thought that these occurrences may actually be encouraging people to look deeper. You may have heard of Mike Cleland. Mike has proposed that since we do not have initiatic experiences anymore, like in the old tribal cultures and stuff, there were the rites of like vision quests and things like that people would go on. There were initiatic experience that brought people into new phases of life. since we don't have those anymore in our modern Western culture, that the paranormal, in his case, he's talking more about UFO stuff, but that the paranormal is actually a form of initiation, because it takes a person, takes their worldview, and turns it completely upside down.
Yeah.
And then, forces them to really start over, to begin anew, which is what an initiatic process should do. It's supposed to be a beginning, something that takes you into a new space, spiritually or mentally or whatever. So we could make an argument that these various crazy experiences that people are having, whether you're talking about Sasquatch or man-wolf or UFO phenomena or lake monsters, which I talk about a lot in the Canadian Monsters and Mysteries books, all of those things are initiatic experiences for some of these witnesses. I think it would be super interesting to do a study of witnesses, say 5 years down the line. How's your life changed? I mean, we know that people who have, for instance, near-death experiences often experience very profound changes in their life.
That is true.
I'd like to know what sort of effect being a witness to some of this paranormal stuff has on people. I know, in my own life, I've had a really interesting experience when I was working in hotel security many, many years ago. Kind of a poltergeist experience that really got me thinking about things. And I suspect that that's true of a lot of people. I mean, when you see people going on like the Sasquatch podcasts and stuff, they're always like, well, do you go back out in the woods anymore? And, I would be asking them, so how has this changed your life?
Exactly.
What other than, the fact that you saw something really strange, has this changed your life at all? How do you feel about reality and how you perceive reality now?
That's
near
awesome.
Cryptid experiences. There you go. I like that.
NCES.
Yeah.
Love that.
Can I steal that? I might use that in another book.
That's awesome. No, it's true. It has to have that same effect. But please continue with your story. I apologize.
If you want me to tell the story, I can tell the story.
Most certainly. Yes. No, people love to.
So I was working. This is, and this wasn't a major life-changing event, but I've always been interested in this stuff. This was kind of a confirmatory experience for me. I was working as a security officer in a hotel in San Antonio, down on the Riverwalk. So it's a tourist place, right? It's around Christmas time. So the hotel is practically empty. We had maybe a 27% occupancy, right? Which is very, very low.
That is very low.
I get a noise complaint call from a room up in the floor somewhere. I forget exactly what level it was at that time. It's like, noise complaint. Who the hell's making noise up there? There's nobody here.
Right.
So I went upstairs. I make contact with this individual that was in this room. He's like, I don't know what the heck's going on. Somebody is banging on my wall. I'm like, okay, there's nobody in the rooms on either side of you. So I was about to put it down to too many cervezas in the bar or whatever. I no idea what the heck was going on with this guy. There was it was quiet while I was standing there. I start to leave, and all of a sudden I hear this boom, 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 boom on the wall next to me. The bedroom wall. I'm like, okay. So my partner's up with me. So I went in the room right next to this individual, And my partner goes into the room on the other side of that room. And we search both rooms thoroughly. There's nothing there. So we're like, okay. And again, I walk into the one room and the banging starts on the wall on the other side.
So they're definitely messing.
So, and then my partner walks into this one room, and then the banging stops for a minute. So we go back into the room that we were originally in, and the banging starts above us.
Oh,
so then we go up to the. By the time we were done with this thing, we had hit every room above this guy, every room below this guy, all the rooms on the side of him. You know, the only thing I hadn't done was figure out a way to stick my head out the window because the windows were sealed, right?
Just to see
if there was somebody hanging on the side of the building. You know, I was getting. And it was messing with us because we'd go one place and it would knock somewhere else, and then we'd go to that place and it would knock somewhere else. This went on for 30 minutes, an hour, something like that.
Wow. So this isn't a 10-15 minute thing at all.
Yeah. No, this wasn't a short-term thing. We were running around the hotel for a while. This is okay because we didn't have anything else going on that night.
Yeah.
That was our big excitement for the evening, but we didn't know how to write a report on this, right? It's like,
yeah, what do you say about we heard noise, but we couldn't locate?
We even went and opened they had these chases, runs, conduits, I guess you'd call them, that you open, and there was the pipes in there. And we were in there with those big mag light flashlights looking to see if there was like rodents in the pipes or something, right? There was nothing there. There was absolutely nothing there. So, we eventually it stopped, and we didn't have any further trouble. And that just verified for me what I already knew: this hotel was haunted. And I knew it was haunted because we had a security officer who's a Filipino guy, kind of superstitious, right?
Okay.
Poor guy was on floor patrol one night, and I get this call from him. It's like, you need to come to the 24th floor right now. It's like, okay. Like, officer
24th floor, that's a big hotel.
Yeah, it's a big hotel, right? And there's I'm laughing at comments again.
Oh, yeah, they're having fun.
There's a ballroom on that floor, right? So I go up there like running a hot call because I thought, he was in trouble, right?
Yeah.
Because occasionally, you get hotel guests that were just being unreasonable or, whatever. They were drunk or, anyway. He wasn't a very big guy, so, maybe he needed some help, right? So I'm up there hauling butt to get up there. I get up there, and I find him standing in the lobby where the elevator is. And he is, this is a fairly dark complected guy. He is white as a ghost. And I was like, dude, what's going on? It's like, he's stammering. He can't even talk, right? So I sit him down, get him calmed down a little bit. It's like, what happened? He's like, he's walking floor patrol. He walks out to the edge of the ballroom, and he sees a woman standing in the center of the ballroom. Classic woman in white, right?
Okay.
White gown, the whole deal, right? Old-fashioned clothes, the whole bit. So, nobody's supposed to be up there because that floor is closed at that time. So he starts to go out onto the ballroom floor to tell this woman she needs to go back, get on the elevator, and go back down to her room, right? It's about halfway to where she's standing. She disappears right in front of his eyes. Boom, gone. Done. Wow. Scared the hell out of him.
I can imagine. Yeah, because that's a little different. I mean, it's still scary to see a monster, but just to have a person just...
So he, from then on, anytime he needed to go to the ballroom, he would call for backup. He would not go up there by himself ever again.
Poor guy.
Poor guy was just, he was...
Well, To be fair for him, I mean, and we have about 7 minutes to the end of the show here. To be fair, he could have ended up, just disappearing, right? He could have been one of those guys who displaced in time, which I would love. I know we only have 7 minutes or so left, but I know you have just a couple stories where some people did displace time and happen to come back. And I would love to hear at least one or two, if you can squeeze it in, of those, just for people to hear about before we unfortunately have to wrap up with you tonight. Because again, guys, you got to get the book. I'll keep dropping the link here in the chat to make sure you guys are able to look this up. And obviously, if you're playing it back, the links to everything are in the show notes. But yeah, what do you think about these cases? I'm personally fascinated when time displacement takes place because it's just an oddity.
We've actually, during the course of this conversation, covered all three of my books. So,
I love it.
So we've got, we've got links to all of them in there. So the time distortion stuff is mostly things that you find in my book, Mysteries in the Mist. But one of my favorite just physics distortion things is a story out of Australia where this young man was driving home from I think he's a traveling salesman, if I remember right. He's traveling home. He's driving his car. He sees one of these colored clouds, right? It's like, this is my charge to all the paranormal peeps out there. Please, if you see a cloud that is not a natural color, be very careful about approaching this thing because weird stuff happens around these clouds.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm dead serious about this. Weird stuff happens around these clouds. You could disappear completely. You could end up somewhere different. Or in this case, the young man is driving down the road. He sees this cloud off to the side, and he notices that his headlights, and this is a physics impossibility, his headlights are bending toward the cloud.
Ooh.
And he's trying to compensate as he's driving down the road, but he realizes that he's drifting off the road, and he comes very close to hitting a tree, right? But he manages to pull his car back onto the road and get down the road away from this cloud, and everything straightens out, and he's all good. Now, there was no time distortion in this. But the interesting thing is that he is watching the news a couple of days later, and he sees where an individual crashed their car on that same stretch of road. So, being a good citizen, he contacts his local constabulary, and he tells them about this weird thing that happened to him.
Yeah.
The spooky thing about this story is that traffic fatality, the tree that this car crashed into was the exact same tree that he almost ran into.
Wow.
So you have to wonder, if this wasn't a case where, this cloud reappeared and just kind of drew this car off the road.
Yeah. And I'm not smart enough to know this, but I'm sure we've got a smart person out there that's listening in the chat. I mean, obviously, Travis is a very intelligent man, but I'm saying someone who specifically deals with what kind of either gravity and or light moves light part, like how that works. Because the way that light waves work, I've seen him already saying about how the photons work. There's got to be something out there that we'll attempt to scientifically describe. Why would it bend the light?
It's called a black hole. It's the only thing I know of that will bend light.
Yeah, that's it. That's for me too. That's about the extent of what I know about.
Now the physics geeks out there might know, of something else, but that's the only thing that I can think of that will do that.
Yeah, gravity will.
As far as time distortion stuff, there's a story out of England where families driving along singing Beatles songs and having a good old time.
As one does.
They're heading home, and they again encounter one of these funny clouds. It's a funny color. They drive through it, and they realize suddenly that they are considerably farther down the road than they should have been. And they have lost a period of time. I don't remember exactly how much time they've lost. But again, you have the cloud associated with the time distortion phenomena. There's also a story in Mysteries in the Mist about a fellow who's flying his aircraft in the Bermuda Triangle, of all places, who encounters a very large cloud, gets into it, has trouble with his instrumentation and all this other sort of stuff, finally flies out of this thing and actually comes to a place where he realizes that they have proceeded much farther along their flight plan than they should have, given the allotted time. So again, you have that time distortion effect.
Wow.
It's...
I was just gonna say it's absolutely fascinating dealing with any of these topics. And I sometimes, man, 2 hours is just not enough. But unfortunately, we have already come to the end of 2 hours. I don't know how. I feel like we just got going, and there's so much in your stories that we really didn't get to hit on. So, guys, make sure, for sure, you got to check out here the old Canadian Monsters and Mysteries. But don't forget, you can also look into all of Travis's books. Obviously, they're the one we just mentioned, Phantom, Black Dogs, Walkers of the Liminal Way, as well as Mysteries in the Mist and Hunting the Beast. However, that is a fiction book, not based in the actual stories. But all your other ones are factually based as possible, as we know them to be, correct?
Yes. And I have one final thing to say about Canadian Monsters and Mysteries. If you don't read this book for any other reason, read it because of giant beavers.
I have no other way to end the show. That's it right there. So, everyone, thank you so very much for being here tonight. And obviously, we have all the links where if you'd like to get into touch with W.T. Watson, as he is known, or goes by Travis, the links to everything are in the chat there. Travis, I have to say this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you very much for coming on and spending your time with us here over in the Woo Train as we're pulling back into the station this evening. I bid you a good evening, or weekend, I should say, here, and I truly appreciate you coming on and hanging out with us. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me. I really had fun.
Absolutely. And as I'll say, ending any and all shows that I wrap up, we ask you all to stay curious and to keep it weird.
Stay healthy, my friend.
You too.
You need bail money, give me a call.
Always, Dad. Take care.
You too.